Webcam microphone up close.
Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a...
But I have the files. You know, I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, you know, days and the fondle slap of choice, I don't know when that was, doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter whether the cartoon comes from, as long as it's real. It doesn't, it's hard to get real information. Because seriously, they don't want you to have just read two sources whenever I try to prove out, you know, it's not a surprise. You expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to sadly disappoint another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty, dirty old man, huh?
Really? Can't be serious. Is this really how you want things to be? Come on. More hooker, eruptions? Eruptions, whatever.
Like Dave Powers kind of...
Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from Pima Region 2-3 within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America. We bring you the Ochelli Effect.
I damn sure know I'm an original.
We have all these situations. I'd love to know why it takes 50 years, for
that's that.
For a 19-year-old girl to eventually get up to gumption to put these things out.
And live on a Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, it is the Ochelli Effect. I'm your host, Chuck Ochelli, on UCY.TV radio. Thank you to all the listeners checking us out on the webpage. Thank you to the people checking us out on the iTunes stream, the TuneIn apps, whatever device you are utilizing to get this broadcast. Thank you so much. And for those of you catching it downstream, also thank you. Now, tonight, of course, I'm going to bring you John Barber once more, and John is a rather interesting guy, and we have no idea really where this discussion will go, but, it never ceases to amaze me, actually, what directions we go in and what stuff we end up covering, because John is just one of these guys who has led an interesting life and who has produced some of the most influential work, in my opinion, as far as the media goes, in the past half century, including a great documentary on the JFK case, all about Jim Garrison, which, of course, was the major reason why I started to pay attention to John's work. But, he also, as I did not realize earlier in life, was the man who brought us Real People, was also the man who was quite involved with being a film critic for a long time, had been really an innovator in television, and all of these things. Now, however, we move a little bit forward past the final word on the assassination, which is, of course, that focus on Jim Garrison, but was an updated version which contained a presentation in Las Vegas and all that. We go a little past that because, you know what, there's a new book out, which features basically what John does on social media. And, John, are you with me?
Yes, I am, Chuck. How are you? And by the way, that picture of your baby is absolutely adorable and looks almost exactly like the picture of my son when he was born. It's incredible how close they are.
Well, I have great high hopes for my son. He has a different look, I'll say, about him than most children do, so I'm sure your son was very striking looking if you looked similar to him. I've never seen a picture of your son as a baby, but, he was very striking looking to me, and the expressions on his face are kind of, I don't know if it's just me being a proud parent or that it's just remarkable. I'm not sure which.
Well, something I've never really said publicly, but I came from a very, very dysfunctional family long before it was popular, and I grew up without a father, and actually after the age of 6 or 7 without really a mother, who was a nymphomaniac and an alcoholic, and brought home 24 uncles over the years, many of whom I had to fight off or go to the cops for help. So when I swore, when I saw my mother's, what was happening to my mother, I swore off alcohol, and I've never drunk hard liquor in my life, and I didn't start drinking a glass of wine till I was well in my 30s, but I had sworn that I would never have children because of my background. Anyway, I met my wife when I was working my second professional job as a stand-up at the Hungry Eye in San Francisco. And I was the opening act for a black girl singer by the name of Amanda Ambrose. And Amanda was the first black Afro-American that I ever saw who wore a traditional African garb called the dashiki. So she walked out on stage looking like she'd just come from Kenya. And San Francisco, I thought, was an extremely liberal town. And evidently it wasn't entirely, because half of the audience used to tell her to go back to Africa. And she came off the stage most of the time just bawling her eyes out. Anyway, one day she came into my dressing room, and she was crying again, but she was looking at something on her finger. And I said, "What happened? What happened? Were they after you again?" And she says, "No, look at this, look at this." And she showed me this gorgeous emerald ring. And I said, "What is that?" She said, "This lovely young lady came up to me and she says, 'Miss Ambrose, I don't want you to think that everybody in San Francisco feels the way that some of you have treated you. We just got together and wanted to get you something to show you how much we appreciate your talent. And this emerald ring must have cost a fortune.'" So anyway, I said to her, could you introduce me? So she took me out into the lobby, and sitting at this bar, talking to the owner of the Hungry Eye, a really gruff, bright, big-bodied Italian, wore a tam. His name was Enrico Banducci. And Enrico Banducci was obviously in love with this young lady who was about 20 years younger, and she looked almost like Liz Taylor. Well, for me, it was love at first sight. Anyway, Amanda introduced me, and we dated from that time on. She could have married a bunch of millionaires, but she chose to marry this helpless comic. But I told her, I never want children. I have no idea what kind of father I'm going to be. And she never said a word. She went along with it. We moved to L.A., we lived on potatoes for about 2 weeks in a motel, and it was very, very tough. Anyway, I started to do the Merv Griffin show, and as a result of that, I was hired to host a game show called Connections. And the game shows that I liked early were Do You Trust Your Wife with Johnny Carson and the Groucho Marx show, because they got to interview the guests, and they told me that I would be able to interview the guests. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a game show host. Anyway, interviewing the guests was the extremely successful part of the run-throughs, and so ABC decided to go to pilot. Anyway, we get ready to do the pilot. Now, Chuck, I'm making very, very, very little money. And if I get this job, it starts at like $2,500 a week, which is just an enormous amount of money.
Oh, a lot of money back then. I mean,
yeah, and so this was like 1969. So anyway, we get to the stage where we're going to do the pilot, and ABC executive comes down to me and the producer and say, we want to cut short the interviews. We just want to do the game portion. And I told the producer, I don't want to do just the game portion. I'm not cut out to do that. So we were forced to do that, which we did. And I told the producer, even if it goes ahead, get yourself another host. I'm not doing this. Anyway, I come back to L.A. We have this small apartment on Kling Street, just across from a very famous market called Gelson's in North Hollywood. And whenever I came home from a gig, my wife would always open the door. She was next to Fred Astaire, the greatest tap dancer I ever saw. She sang as well as Ella Fitzgerald. So every time I came home, she would do a song and dance at the door. So I came home, and she was sure I was going to get this job. Knocked on the door. She opened the door, and she's doing this song and dance, and asked me how it went. I said, I turned it down. I can't do that show. Without missing a beat, her eyes just filled with tears, and she said, that means we can't have a baby. Now, for 3 years we'd been together, just been married about a year, and I felt like an absolute and total jerk. Here she had suppressed this desire for the 3 years she knew me. As a matter of fact, she told me last week it was the only lie she ever told to me. So I stood at the door very matter-of-factly, and I said, honey, you know what? We tried it my way for 3 years, and it has not worked. So let's try it your way. You want to have a child? Let's have a child. So I fathered my son. From the moment, Chuck, that my wife got pregnant, and she was an amniotic fluid junkie. She was the happiest woman I ever saw. Nothing bothered her. But my luck changed immediately. The first thing that happened to me is Merv Griffin recommended me to Westinghouse as his replacement because he was going to go to CBS, and they put me under contract for $600 a week. My son was born, and to show you how supportive my wife was, it was at the First Presbyterian Hospital in the San Fernando Valley, and the doctor came out to me because they didn't want me in the same room because I would be a basket case, so he came out to me, and he said, your wife told me to tell you that she has just given birth to an 8-pound, 9-ounce host. That's how much she thought of me while she was giving birth to our son, that I might end up being the new host of the Westinghouse show and replacing Merv Griffin. And I never have experienced anything more profound than becoming the father of that child. And if there is such a thing as reincarnation, Chuck, I must tell you, I want to come back as my son, because he had by far the greatest parents that anybody ever had. We never once had to spank him, never once had to raise our voice to him. And I remember when I was a kid and my mother would bring home some of these drunks, she would talk to these drunks the way I'm talking to you, but then when she would talk to me, she would talk to me in this little voice like I was a little tiny baby. I was 5 years of age and kept thinking to myself, hey, I'm not an idiot. Talk to me the way you talk to these guys. That's the way I talk to my son. And my advice to you is talk to your child the same way you talk to your friends, the same way you talk to anybody. Don't change the tone of your voice. Always be yourself. And my son grew up to be one of the 3 brightest people I ever met. One of them was Jim Garrison. The other was a scientist by the name of Buckminster Fuller. And the third, of course, was my son. And when he was 5, he was in school, and he got to go into a special ed class. And a special ed class meant a class for geniuses. And I got a call from a Chinese-American scholar who used to go around to these schools and test the kids to see how smart they were. And she said, Mr. Barber, this is my job, testing children to see how smart they are. And I've tested hundreds this week, and I've only run across 2 who are legitimate geniuses. One is your son, and one is a Chinese girl. And I said, well, how can you tell from a 5-year-old if they're a genius? She said, well, we ask them questions. I said, well, ask me a question. You asked my son. She said, okay, what do laughter and tears have in common? Can you answer that, Chuck? She asked me.
Yeah.
Okay, can you answer it?
Well, probably I would have said they're both emotional responses.
That's exactly right. Well, I missed it. So, anyway, my son comes home and I give him a big hug and I say, congratulations. And I said to him, Christopher, I said, how on earth did you know that when she asked you that? And you know what he said? He said, simple, Dad, Star Trek. So, anyway, and, you know, he grew up to be this, so he was, up until the age of 16, he was the Caucasian Tiger Woods. In golf, he shot his first first 69 when he was 13, and he beat Phil Mickelson. And Bobby May won the Canadian National when he was 15. He was recruited by Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and Stanford, and went to Stanford only because Tom Watson went there. But he ended up not being enamored of golfers because he said he had nothing to talk to them about. So he kept a log. His hobby was writing. And I must tell you, if he could have putted, he would have been Tiger Woods. He would have been Rory McIlroy. But he couldn't putt. He would hit 16 greens and shoot even par, which is just dreadful. So his hobby became his profession. He ended up becoming one of the head writers of CSI Vegas in Hollywood, and he is now one of the co-executive producers, all on the basis of his hobby, which was writing. And he had absolutely no help from me, because by that time I had burned all my bridges in Hollywood. So anyway, your new child is in for just a great life.
You know, I'm hoping so. I got to say that you know, I mean, I've had two others, and my daughter speaks exactly like I do because of the way that I spoke to her when she was very, very young. I never spoke down to her. Her communication skills are very strong. She disagrees with me quite a bit. She doesn't quite think her daddy's entirely crazy, but she disagrees quite strongly and has her own opinions, and they're developing. She's 15 now, but her communication has always been remarkable. And you know, a similar background is something that I have with you here, John, because if you simply replace the ages a little bit, I lost my father when I was 4. My mother was virtually non-existent after that. It wasn't alcohol per se; it was more the drug life. But I had that same series of nefarious individuals in and out of my life when I was younger. You know, same kind of deal though. And so to be honest with you, I had a lot of reservations about having children as well. I really did not know, because you begin to question when you don't have the father figure in your mind. Will I be able to pull this off? I don't have a good example to work from. You know, so I just did what I thought was best with my daughter, and I made my mistakes, and I know that. You know, with my son now, I'm very much hoping that I've learned from that, and I will go even further. But I'm very proud of all my children, and each one of them has created a watershed event in my life. They have each changed the direction of my life as it has gone on, and Frankie will be no exception, I'm very sure. You know, because he comes around at a time when I'm really getting out there and expressing my voice, trying to express myself more intellectually than I used to. I never wrote things on my own. I never did broadcasts on my own. I always assisted other people and appeared in other people's stuff, you know, as a ghostwriter in some cases, as just an assistant, as a researcher, and now that I'm sort of doing it for myself here, you know, my son, the new one, is going to get a totally different sort of perspective. But I have never spoken down to any of them. I've always tried to speak to them to what level they could understand.
Betty Davis gave a great piece of advice to the world years and years ago. She said, you must absolutely fall in love with your work, because in the final analysis, the love of your work is going to be your only company. Because your spouses will leave you, your children will leave you, your employers will leave you. all you'll have left to love is your work. So you better fall in love with it. And I never forgot that. So I've always passionately loved what it is that I do. And when I got in trouble, which is often in Hollywood, it was because people were trying to interfere with the work that I was doing, which did happen often, and eventually led to my departure from the show that I created, Real People. But in any event, I've, a Civil War survivor once said, I never got anything that I really wanted in my life, but I got everything that I needed. And the same thing has sort of happened to me. I have sometimes got a lot of the things that I wanted, but most of all, I didn't. But I did get a lot of the things that I needed. And what I needed, of course, was a wife like the wife I got, and a child like the child I got.
Well, yeah, and it's at exactly the right time in my life that Kim happened along as well. This is all later in life for me, really. I mean, I'm now in my 40s, which I know you're older than I am, but if you look at the way that my life developed, this is sort of like my second life beginning at 40, and and the fact that Kimberly is with me on this is exactly who I need in my life.
Well, listen, Chuck, there are a lot of extremely successful people didn't get successful until they were past 40, for crying out loud. I didn't get Real People until I was 46. Now, when I was 45, and I was working as the critic for Los Angeles Magazine, and I was the critic at large at NBC in Burbank every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I only got $300 a week. The weather girl was making herself like $5,000 a week, and I was responsible for more people watching the news than was our weather girl, as adorable as Kelly Lang was. But I had never signed a contract with NBC because they would have owned my material. So I was fired and kicked out of the building 2 or 3 times for some of the reviews I did, but I was always brought back because I was responsible for 10% of their audience. And I remember I was 45, my son was 6 years old at the time, and I was walking home from just taking a walk by the golf course. And I said to myself, geez, I'm 45. I'm only making $300 a week. I'm surrounded by people who are making a fortune, and somehow or another I can't get an agent, I can't get a manager. I'm doing this all on my own. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? I'm going to give it all up. I'm going to get myself a job as a writer on a comedy show or something like that, make myself $1,000 or $2,000 a week. It's not what I want, but what I really need to do is devote my life to my son and my wife. I mean, I'm halfway through my life. I have really nothing. I mean, I'm well known, and people think I'm successful, but I'm not making any money that is parallel to the success I have. So I thought, I'm going to give it up. And I literally walked into the house giving it up, Chuck. The next day, I got a phone call from a fellow named Digby Wolf. Now, a lot of people don't know this. Digby Wolf was the actual creator of a show called Laugh-In. Laugh-In, Digby Wolf was this Australian alcoholic comedy writer who was an absolute genius. And you may remember at the time, he had gotten involved with a guy named George Slaughter, who had produced the Judy Garland show and maybe a couple of comedy shows, not very successful. Digby was absolutely brilliant, and they got this order from NBC to do a comedy show. So what George Slaughter did is he stole a lot of Ernie Kovac's material, a lot of Hell's a Poppin' material from a Broadway show, and put it together in sort of fast skit stuff, but didn't know what to call it.
And then they dressed it up in that sort of, with the psychedelic background.
Yes,
which,
exactly. And they had no idea what to call the show. And Digby said, look, they're having these sit-ins all around the country now, these blacks. Why don't we call it Laugh-In? And that's how it was born. And nobody knows this, and George Slaughter won't give credit to anybody else but himself. But anyway, I got this call from Digby because he was a huge fan of the reviews, and he called and he said, do you have any ideas for a show? And I said, yeah, because I'd gotten a call from Ray Stark. You know the name Ray Stark?
Mm-hmm.
Ray Stark, probably the best producer of movies in Hollywood for about 10 or 15 years. The Way We Were with Robert Redford, Barbra Streisand, a lot of really great movies. He called me and he wanted me to write a screenplay for him because he was a big fan of the reviews and told me he'd pay me $50,000. And he would give me a third to start, a third when I delivered it, a third when they produced it. And I turned him down because I said it would be a conflict of interest. How stupid is that? I mean, that was sort of the morality in those days. Today, there is no morality. I would have probably jumped at it. I said, I'm a film critic. I can't do that. He said, well, James Agee was a film critic, and he did African Queen. He said you could do the same. I said, well, I have an idea for a reality show about real people. And I told him a bunch of these stories. He liked the idea, said he'd help me produce it. But then his agency, William Morris, called me back and said, Ray can't do that. We want him to stick with movies. Anyway, I get this call from Digby. He said, can you come over to my office? I just signed a deal with Westinghouse. They want me to create a show. And I know you have some great ideas. So I went over and I was sitting down. Digby had an office on the second floor in the same building as George Slaughter. And I'm sitting in the foyer waiting to be called in by Digby, and George Slaughter walks out. Mm. And he said, John, how you doing? I said, I'm doing fine. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm waiting to go in to talk to Digby. Talk to Digby, what about? He said, well, he wants to talk to me about a show. He has some kind of deal at Westinghouse. He says, come on in here a minute. I got something at NBC. So he calls me into his office. And he said, I got a call from Freddie Silverman. You know, I have a deal to do 4 shows called Country versus City, sort of country music versus city music, country jokes versus city jokes. But Freddie Silverman called me and asked me if I could do a show about real people. And I know that you've been going around town trying to sell a show about real people. You even had it for a year at ABC, and you tried to get Richie Pryor as your co-host, and they turned you down. I said, that's right. He said, how would you like to do it here? And I said, what do you mean? He said, it's a firm deal. And then he wrote on a piece of paper $5,000. And he handed me the piece of paper, and he said, that's what I'll pay you just to perform. But you'll get to write, you'll get to host, and you'll get a lot more. And we have 4 specials, so you'll get $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in the first couple of months. Mm. And I said, can I produce it? He says, no, you can't produce it. I'm producing it. But I'll give you a royalty because you created the show. So I gave my handshake and we were on, okay? The shows started at the bottom because NBC was on the bottom, but it got like 8,000 pieces of mail, which was more than any show in television was getting. And NBC got thrilled and ordered 2 more specials. We did 2 more specials, and we did the series. Within a year, it was the #1 show. We're getting 25,000 pieces of mail a week. But I had given up ever being in the business, really, as a performer, when this accident happened and Real People started, you know. And I used to do a whole thing in my act about the best things in life are those things that happen by accident, and the worst are always those things that are really well planned.
And it is so true. I mean, and let's not gloss over this real quick, because when you said Richie Pryor, I don't know if my listeners catch that we are talking about the guy who is a stand-up legend, who is a comedy legend. We're talking about Richard Pryor here. Okay, so this was the idea, and of course he was sort of persona non grata with the networks at that point because a lot of things really. But
for two things. First of all, he was doing a series of 2 or 3 specials at NBC, supposed to have had a free creative hand, and the censors took out one of the skits that he wanted to do, so he went and punched the guy in the face. The other thing was he was arrested by the IRS for non-payment of income taxes, and so that's the reason that the guy at ABC told me that this black, he called him a nigger in the office. He said that nigger is never getting on this network, and he never did. But I said to him, I said, Richie Pryor can put 10,000 asses on seats in the Coliseum, for crying out loud. He's going to be a major star. But they turned him down. And Richie ended up being the most successful American entertainer for at least a half a dozen years.
Right. I mean, he made movies, and of course, like I said, the stand-up is legendary, and this is, way prior to a lot of the other revelations that came out about him and all this other stuff. But, I mean, we're talking about when it was early in his career here where he could have been doing that as well. But, yeah, he was kind of a rough character. He had caused a lot of problems. There was that situation where he punched somebody in the face. There was, domestic problems that he was having and all this other stuff. And as we learned by his own exposés on his own life later on, a lot of this stuff was drug-fueled. And, a lot of geniuses are very troubled by this kind of stuff. And Richard Pryor was certainly one of them. And this is just an amazing sort of story. And
but you know what, Chuck? There is no reason for that. It's like my closest friend and my mentor when I started as a comic was Red Fox, and I was the first one to put Red on an entertainment show. Nobody would book him because he did these party records, and absolutely nobody would ever book him. As a matter of fact, I may have told you before, I may have told you off camera, off the microphone, about Red got the largest laugh that I have ever heard in television. Did I tell you that?
You know what? I can't remember if you told me on this show, but I do know this story. I would love to just go over it again, though, because it's just absolutely one of the greatest things I ever heard.
I've known 3 real comedy, maybe 4. 2 of the wittiest comedians I ever met were, of course, Red Fox and Jackie Mason. Off the top of their head, ad-lib, by far the wittiest. The funniest I ever knew was probably Jonathan Winters, probably in a class by himself. But anyway, I knew all of, and the only thing that Red smoked at that time was marijuana. He didn't smoke a lot of it, but he did smoke when his father died. And when Jews died, it's sitting Shiva. When the Irish die, they have a wake and they drink and laugh and tell stories about the deceased. Well, Red had about a dozen people down to his club, which was the old Slate Brothers on La Cienega, and told stories about his father while they were all smoking dope. I never smoked anything, never took drugs, never took anything, because I didn't want anything to interfere with the reality of my life. I mean, because I knew if I took anything, it would dim the happiness I would feel, and if I felt pain, it wouldn't make the pain go away. As a matter of fact, if I sobered up, the pain would probably be worse. But anyway, Red was just such a great help to me in advising me about performing when I started. Well, he had done, Hugh Downs interviewed him on the Today Show for about 2 or 3 minutes one morning, and Red was very, very charming, and good for Hugh because he had the balls to do it. But nobody would touch Red. Anyway, I was signed...
Well, John, let me just interject something here, because I think a lot of my listeners probably don't realize that Red Fox, when you talk about doing these party records, we're talking about the original sort of explicit stuff that was, very much, sort of not part of the mainstream, guaranteed, and was one of those things that people.
They were called blue records. That's why they call them party records.
Yep.
I can remember to this day. I heard it 60 years ago. One of the lines from one of the party records. He said, "What's a sardine? A sardine's a little fish that smells like a finger."
You see, but the thing is,
I mean, let me tell you something, Chuck. Funny is funny, and he was hilarious doing this stuff. It was dirty funny, but it wasn't filthy funny. I mean,
no, that was the great thing, and that's the thing about Red Fox's stuff way back then, is that it was absolutely brilliant observational stuff, and
that's
it was
right.
all these taboo subjects. And the thing was, this is before the Sanford and Son and everything else.
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, Sanford is his real name, John Sanford. Mm-hmm. And then they named the character after his real name. And the name Fred was from his older brother who died very young. So, right. In any event, he did this wonderful material about black power and white power in his act, which was all clean, strong, and funny. Right. So anyway, when I was signed by Metro Media, Westinghouse had signed David Frost to replace Merv Griffin instead of me, even though when I substituted for Merv, my ratings were as high or higher than Merv's and certainly higher than David Frost, because people were used to seeing somebody like Jack Parr or Johnny Carson come out at the top of the show and do a monologue, which I did. None of those other guys did. But anyway, the head of Westinghouse was an Anglophile, and he knew if he went to England that David Frost could take him to Buckingham Palace and 10 Downing Street, which had nothing to do with appealing to an American audience. And, of course, David Frost did bomb, as I told them they would. Metro Media signed me as a backup because they didn't think Frost would work. They gave me a Saturday night show, a sort of a poor man's Tonight Show. Mm. And on my second show, I booked Charo. You remember Charo?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Charo. Hoochie Coochie.
With the boa and the whole...
Great Latin singer and great guitar player. I booked comedian Jack Carter. I booked a guy called the Crying Comedian, and I booked Red Fox. The last one to come out was Red. Okay, so when he came out and sat down, I asked him how he felt about Black Power and asked him how he felt about the movement. And he said right away, "John, I don't cares about the Black Power or the White Power. I just cares about green power, because if you got the green, you can buy the places where the blacks and whites hold the meetings." So anyway, the audience chuckled a little bit, and out of nowhere, I don't know why I did this, but I do this all the time. Something pops into my head, and I don't have the sense to stop it, so it pops out, which we'll get to when we talked about my little Facebook book. So I said to Red, "Red, why do you think money's colored green?" Without missing a beat, he looks at me and looks at the audience and says, "That's 'cause Jews pick it before it gets ripe." Well, my God, the place absolutely erupted. You could not stop. The audience never heard anything this funny or this honest or this harsh or this profound in their lives. And whenever the laughter died down, Jack Carter's Jewish used to pull out his wallet, pull out his money, and threw it on the floor and said, "I picked it before it got green." Well, it was bedlam. There has never been a laugh that big or that loud in all of television. So there you go. And you could
never get away with something like that today, because we are now in the politically correct age where, believe me, that would hit the cutting room floor. You could never air something like that live. They'd cut to something or other on you, that's for sure, during the delay. There's no way.
I mean, it's the other person I met who was really a comic genius and sadly got into drugs was Lenny Bruce. I spent a lot of time with Lenny. And he was brilliant. And if you listen to some of his first records, they're not dirty at all. Some of them are really hilariously funny. His Lone Ranger bit, which was turned into a little cartoon. I mean, just absolutely classic, how to make a colored person feel comfortable at a party. The guy was brilliant, but he was harassed and hounded by the establishment because he used to do a lot of anti-Catholic stuff. And he was arrested in cities like Chicago, which are very Catholic, and cities like San Francisco, which are very Catholic. And I guess he got to taking drugs, but when he died, my suspicion is that his death was somehow facilitated by the Los Angeles Police Department and the establishment when they arranged to sell him some bad crap. And when he died, they staged that horrifying picture of him lying naked on the floor in his bathroom. There was no need for them to do that, but they staged it to send a message out to America about how sick this guy was. So if you denigrate somebody like Lenny Bruce, you're not going to pay any attention to the truths that he's telling you about the Catholic Church.
Well, this is yet another thing that they do, is to try and discredit someone who has a voice like that, especially somebody who is basically an automatic, double entendre machine, which Red Fox was as well. Because if you listen to a lot of his routines as a stand-up, there are plenty of double meanings all throughout his stuff. And even when he was improvisational, even when he was interacting with an audience member who was heckling him or whatever else, everything just had double meanings. And these were just these guys who could think on multiple tracks and on their feet and absolutely interact with an audience. And you couldn't get anything past these guys. And Lenny is a really sad example, because toward the end of his life, one of the only places he could perform was actually in San Francisco.
I saw one of his last performances there, and what he did is he recounted his trial.
Yeah, he was reading from the court transcripts during
reading from the court transcripts. So when it was over, we went out on the street and we walked around North Beach, and he told me, he was talking, I had done a comedy album called It's Tough to Be White with liner notes by Dick Gregory. He told me how much he liked the album. But he said to me, John, if I had to do it all over again, I would do it entirely differently. He said, I have no bank account. I have no home that I own. I have no car. Look what I'm ending up doing. Well, anyway, I arranged for him to get a booking at a place where I used to work out called the Golden Bear in Huntington Beach, California. And I said to him, Lenny, I fell in love with your work, not your court appearances. You're not Clarence Darrow. You're more like Mark Twain, You're a humorist, for crying out loud. You're not a lawyer. What you should do is do some of the stuff at this club in Huntington Beach. They're not like San Francisco. They're not jazz aficionados. It's country music. It's folk music. Do that stuff. Anyway, I went down to see him opening night. And it was the kind of place, a huge barn-like affair that had sawdust on the floor. Lenny came out and did every one of the classic bits from his first two comedy albums to an absolute standing ovation. He was brilliant. If somebody had filmed that or taped that, it would still be in the top 10 of comic videos in the world. He was so good. And then a few months later, he was dead. Yeah.
Yeah, and sadly, they're still circulating the show in New York City where he was busted, and and that San Francisco show where he's reading from the court transcripts. I really feel a deep sadness watching that, because I know this was the man unraveling. He had been through all those court battles, and simply, being hindered the way he was, and being attacked and pilloried like he was.
And Bob Fosse tried to make his movie with Dustin Hoffman, and it was absolutely horrible. Dustin was horrible. The whole movie was horrible, because the failing of Fosse's movie was that they never showed you the early Lenny Bruce and how he developed all this funny, clean material. He became successful doing clean material. And you know how he used to develop his material? He had to work in strip clubs. And in working in strip clubs, you have to do 2 different 15-minute sets. Well, he only had 15 minutes of material, so he couldn't repeat it for the second show. So what he used to do is he would find a great joke that everybody knew. He would take from the punchline and he would write material backwards. So instead of a 30 or 40-second joke, he'd have a 5-minute story with a punchline. And that's how he started developing and writing his own material. But in the movie, you see Dustin Hoffman's character falling apart at the end, trying to do a performance. But if you don't know Lenny, you don't know what he's trying to perform. And of course, Bob Fosse made that movie while he was under the influence of coke, and he always regretted what he had done. Now, Bob Fosse made one of the great American musicals of all time, and that was All That Jazz.
Right.
Which was, of course, his life story. But he ruined Lenny's.
Right.
Lenny's could have made a great movie.
And yeah, exactly. And that was, that was a disastrous movie. And no matter how they tried to, take care of the cinematography, so that you had this very, dingy sort of view of the whole thing. It was just, it was really awful. And sadly, here's a good thing too that I can identify with this. A lot of performers used to play in strip clubs in between the girls, ladies and gentlemen. Guess how I know this? Because as a musician, I had jobs like this too. And let me tell you something. You can't get more of a walk across fire than that. Because you have a hostile audience who's irritated that you're even giving the girls a break, okay?
Oh, Chuck, let me tell you something.
Yeah.
I got my first Merv Griffin show as a result of being on the Talent Scouts. And that was around 1967 or 1968. So I'm living in L.A. My wife and I have been married for about a year and a half. And I've got to try to find myself a job so I can develop material, because Merv had invited me back almost immediately. There was no place that I could find jobs, because the coffee clubs and the folk clubs, they'd hire for a week, but there were no steady gigs. Well, there was a place on La Cienega Boulevard called The Losers. The Losers was the classiest topless club in the entire country. And inside, the audience was always well-dressed in suits and ties. There were always couples in there, and they had the most beautiful dancers, about 5 or 6 of them. An immaculate club. Anyway, the owner of the club was a guy by the name of Pete Rooney. And he was a tough Irish kid in his early 40s from Detroit, who knew all the guys in the Purple Gang and knew all the mobsters, even though he wasn't one of them. Right. He was friends with a lot of them. Anyway, I came into the club one night, and I asked him if they ever had a comedian in here, and he said, "What for?" And I said, "Well, during the breaks," because during the breaks, they would just pipe in music. They had a live band, but the live band, it was a quintet, five musicians, was only for the girls. When they were off, the intercom would play music for 15 minutes. I said, "Well, for the intermission." He said, "Why?" He said, "They leave. I don't want them to stick around. A new crowd will come in and buy drinks." So he just staring at me. He said, "Why are you asking, kid?" And I said, "Well, I just did my first Merv Griffin show, and I need to find a place to work out some material." And I said, I wouldn't need much money, if any at all. I just need an audience, someplace I can work out. And he stared at me for a minute. He said, "Come back tomorrow night." So I got back. I'm always early, so I was back early.
Right.
And he sent one of the musicians up there after the first set, and the girls took a break. And the musician said, he was the leader of the band, he said, "Mr. Rooney, the owner of our club. Ordinarily at this point, for those of you regulars know that we play some music. Well, we take a little break here, but Mr. Rooney happened to see this young man on the Merv Griffin show a couple of weeks ago. He's sitting in the audience now, this young man, and Mr. Rooney has asked him if he would come up here and do a couple of minutes. So if you don't mind, his name is John Barber. Is it okay if he comes up here? And the audience applauded, and they smiled. They thought, oh, this is something different. And so I got up, and I remember the first line I said, first of all, I thanked him, and I said, you know, that the girls would be back in 15 minutes just as soon as they shaved. Well, the audience howled. So I went into the stuff that I had done on the Merv Griffin show, and they loved it. So I got off the stage, and Pete says, I'll give you $300 a week, but you have to do 2 shows a night. I said, I don't have enough material. He said, well, you're going to start next week, so you better have enough material. So for about 9 months, I did nothing but clean material between sets of topless dancers, and I mean beautiful topless dancers, to this audience, and they were fantastic. They so appreciated the fact that there was a guy up there, clean-cut looking guy in a suit and tie, who was telling these wonderful topical jokes and not sex jokes. And that's where a lot of the material came from when I ended up doing Dean Martin, and I ended up doing Merv's show and all those other shows. That's where I honed it, was in the club, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I wasn't in one of the classier strip joints when I got these kind of jobs, believe me, so I probably had a little more of a drunk, hostile audience.
What kind of instrument did you play?
At the time, I was a vocalist.
Oh, that's right. I remember you said you were a singer. Key Devil. Boy, I'd have given anything if I could have been musical. I mean, especially to be able to sing. I mean, instead of yelling at people, you can just let it out in these big high notes. I mean, let all that emotion and anger out. I still ask my wife to sing to me. My wife is a great singer. And I ask her all the time. As a matter of fact, one of the things that she recorded is up on my Facebook page. And speaking of Facebook, God almighty, it was nearly an hour ago you introduced me talking about this Facebook book. Anyway, are we doing an hour tonight?
No, we've got 2 to work with. So.
Oh, okay. Are you taking a break or anything soon?
No, I wasn't. I don't have any breaks or anything. We just go. If you want, we can take some phone callers.
If you want to take phone calls, if people want to call in and chat, that would be fine. I love talking to people. Often they have more interesting and entertaining things to say than I have. But I would like to chat for a moment, if you don't mind, about what you started to talk about, which was my Facebook book. So.
Well, you see, I get so enthralled with the stories you tell, John. I'm telling you, you're like to me, you're like a living audiobook. Every time I speak with you, whether it's on the air or not, I'm telling you, it's just like I get lost in these stories, and they're just so great because they give you a different insight into what's going on, and it's all based on your life. So I don't know if it's that. You're just an absolutely great storyteller, or if it's just that you've led such an interesting life that the stories themselves are so enthralling, or if it's both. I'm not sure. But I'll tell you what, if anybody wants to join in, I do have the lines open. So 718-717-8296, and I will put you right on with Mr. Barber here, and we'll see where it goes. But in the meantime...
Let me tell you about this little Facebook book that just came out, and the story behind that is.
Well, let me just say something before you go into it, because I know you're gonna. I have an idea about the story, and you told me about it before it was announced and all that, and I kept quiet. I didn't say anything, but I definitely wanted to talk to you about it, because here's the thing. See, I have I have watched the stuff that you post on Facebook. Okay, and it is some of the most interesting and like incredible stuff from somebody who's not like a newsman or a broadcaster or like people that are actually working at making these statements. This stuff comes off the top of your head, and it seems to be some of the most profound, just wisdom. I have no other word for it. Quite honestly, that I see. Among all of the noise and nonsense in social media, the stuff that you have posted over the past couple of years has been just like amazing to me.
Well, again, it goes back to what I said earlier about the best things happen by accident, and all this sort of came about by accident. Back in 1970, when I was trying to book Jim Garrison on my morning show in Los Angeles, and I had read his book Heritage of Stone, and that's why I called him, and that's why I booked him, a booking that was subsequently canceled, and I was fired because of it. But when we were chatting on the phone and talking about the assassination, he mentioned to me that 83, a Gallup poll or a Harris poll, 83% of all Americans did not believe that Lee Harvey Oswald had acted alone, if at all, but that only 21% of those wanted a new investigation other than the Warren report. So he said to me, he says, John, what does that say to you? And I said, Mr. Garrison, it says to me, I know what my mother and father did in the back seat of the car or in the alleyway or in the bedroom to conceive me, but don't ever tell me my mother's not a virgin. Well, he howled and he said, what a great title for a book. So I'd forgotten about it. Well, there's a fellow in Los Angeles named James Griffith who has a small publishing company called Wordsmith Media. And for the last 5 years, he's been after me to write my autobiography, which will be called Your Mother's Not a Virgin, okay? Inspired by my conversation with Jim Garrison. So I'm about 2/3 of the way through it. But I feel about writing the same way Dorothy Parker did. Dorothy Parker, who was a member of the Algonquin Round Table, all those wits years ago, Robert Benchley and Alexander Wolcott in New York, she said, I hate writing, but I love having written. Well, I feel exactly the same way. So my autobiography is coming slow. Anyway, 2.5 years ago, I never had a computer. And I played golf with this guy named David Schulman, who sells steel to the Chinese. So he's very rich and very successful. He said, John, with all the reading you do, for crying out loud, get a computer. I said, David, I can barely operate a typewriter. What could I do with a computer? Anyway, one day he comes over with this computer guy and a computer and it forces it on me. It's on my desk. I still have it. So anyhow, it just sits there. And his wife called me and said, John, you must get on Facebook. And I said, what is Facebook? And she said, well, it's a social media where you talk to all your friends. And I said, listen, I can talk to my few friends on the phone. What do I need to type something on a screen for? She said, no, get Facebook. So I didn't have it. So I called the guy who built my website, David Lispy. He's a genius at computers. I said, David, what is Facebook and how do I use it? So he laughed. He said, John, you do have Facebook. I said, what do you mean I have Facebook? He said, when I built your site, I got you that, I got you Twitter, I got you all those things. LinkedIn, whatever those things are. I said, well, how do I use it? So he gave me my password. I got onto Facebook, and then I tried to write something to see if it worked, and it kept going away. So I called him back. I said, David, it disappears. So he said, you have to use it for crying out loud, otherwise it goes away. It's like a muscle. You don't use it, it atrophies. So write something every day, okay? So every day, Chuck, what I do is I make sure I write a joke or a little commentary so it wouldn't go away. So after a couple of years, I get a call again from James at Wordsmith Media. He said, hey, while we're waiting for you to finish that damn autobiography of yours, you got some of the most terrific stuff on your Facebook page. Why don't we give the public a little hors d'oeuvre and put out a little Facebook book? So I said, okay. So I sent him two years of stuff that I thought was okay. And he called me back and he said, well, now do me a favor and write a thing about why you're doing this book. And I said, why would I need to do that? It's obvious. This is Facebook stuff. That's all it is. No. He said, everybody has an introduction or a dedication or why they did the book. So against my will, I sat down and I wrote, why this book? Why not? I sent it off to him. I had forgotten I'd written. Anyway, he calls back 2 days later. He said, I can't publish your book. And I said, why? He said, I don't want to get sued. He said, but the stuff is so good, I'll help you publish it under your banner so that you can be sued. Anyway, we put it up. Now, it's been up just 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, Thursday. It went up on a Thursday. On Friday evening, he called me. He says, guess what? I said, what? He said, your book has only been up a day, and already it's number 36 in politics, number 57 in humor on Kindle. And I said, what is Kindle? He says, you don't have Kindle? I said, no, what is Kindle? Is it firewood? He said, no, Kindle is like a laptop, and you can download books onto it. And people are downloading it onto their Kindle. Now, that was 2 weeks ago. He called me again 2 days ago, said it's now up to number 11 on Kindle, and it has only been up 2 weeks. Well, I just got, now, on Kindle, Chuck, it only costs $2.45. And on the paperback, which is just adorable, it only costs $4.95. And I got a call from the cousin of the guy who gave me the computer. He took him out for his 60th birthday. He took along the book and read the book to him while they were at dinner. But when I got the book and I opened it up, there was the first page that said, why this book? Why not? And I must tell you, just for me, Chuck, I would buy the book just for that single page. So if you don't mind, it's only a page long, very short. I would love to read that to you because
great.
You don't. I mean, if you had the book there, I would ask you to read it. But I'll read it, and maybe you and your audience can identify a lot with this. So it's called simply it's John Barber's Facebook page. Why this book? Why not? We've all had them. Those great random thoughts that just disappear. Those perfect verbal rejoinders to someone or something that has upset you after they've gone. We all talk to ourselves, like Hamlet. He bemoaned the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the law's delay. So much so, he didn't know whether to kill himself or his uncle. I'm not built to kill anyone, even though my mind keeps popping up with a long list of justifiable homicides. What I am built to do, though, almost against my will, ever since I was an isolated, familyless kid, is not to shoot someone, but just to shoot my mouth off. It got me into a lot of trouble, and then later it got me a lot of large paychecks. In primary school, we had a very fat, mean teacher. In those days, you didn't see many fat people. He was extremely rude and verbally abusive to all of us, especially the skinnier kids like me. Skinny because we were hungry. One day, he complained out loud that he wasn't feeling well, that his ankles were swollen. And I said from the back of the room, "How can you tell?" The class howled. I was strapped with a leather strap soaked in lemon water and became a dropout at 15, the laughter still ringing in my ears. After spending a dozen years trying to track down my father, who had abandoned his 3 children and his wife when I was 6, I found him. Following World War II, where he'd been a colonel in the Canadian Army, he built a successful ad agency in Edinburgh, Scotland. I was 20, and his welcome at my sudden appearance was surprisingly warm, and I had visions of finally being rich and well-fed. He wanted me to see his work. He took me into his elaborate studio, projected on the screen was a sort of Pillsbury Doughboy character jumping into the oven. And in a beautiful baritone, he sang the virtues of it. When he was done, he asked me what I thought. And I said, "You mean you gave up 3 children and their mother to sing to a donut?" I never saw him again, and it was worth it. It was then I decided if I couldn't shut up, I should try to do it for a living, and I did. I became a comic and worked the major clubs from Chicago to Las Vegas. I did 2 albums and appeared regularly on Dean Martin, Merv Griffin, and The Tonight Show with Sinatra. I then originated AM Los Angeles, where I won my first of 5 Emmy Awards, and began doing what no one in news was doing, reviewing movies. This led to 10 years at Los Angeles Magazine and 5 years at KNBC. I left there in '79 when I created television's first reality show, Real People, where I gave real people the chance to tell their own stories. Later, I told Ernie Kovac's story in Ernie Kovac's TV's Original Genius. And to this day, I'm still telling Jim Garrison's story in The Last Word on the Assassination. But like many of you, being semi-retired, I no longer have those large platforms or large paychecks, but I still have all these damn thoughts. So again, like a lot of you, I now vent to myself and a few friends on Facebook, and the amazing thing is the complimentary reaction I get from them is as valuable to me now as any of those large paychecks. Well, that last statement sort of ranks up there with Bill Clinton saying I didn't have sex with that woman. But you get the idea, and I do hope you enjoy some more of mine. Again, as Shakespeare said, brevity is the soul of wit. I've tried to keep it brief, and it's all from my soul. Very sincerely, John Barber.
Wow. I'm amazed that you could write in such a it's absolutely wonderful the way that you put that, the way that whole thing was structured. There's a beautiful arc to that entire anecdote there, which sums up the entirety of a lot of things here. I mean, the fact that a lot of us are relegated now to venting via social media in a secondary nature, the differences between having, worked in Hollywood and having been a voice out there and now doing it this way, and how you are still to this day telling Jim Garrison's story, despite having been, I hate to say this, but despite having been punished for trying to tell the truth about it before.
Well, the surprising things, and people like yourself who are creative, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners will probably realize this. Nicholas Tesla, who was by far the greatest inventor since Michelangelo, said that he never really felt he thought of something on his own, which is amazing for the hundreds of patents that he had and the amazing things that he invented and the amazing things he was prevented from inventing, like free energy. But he said he would sit down and think about it. And he said, as if out of nowhere, now Shirley MacLaine would call this channeling, he said these images would appear in his mind fully formed. And he said he felt not like a creator, but like a stenographer, that he would look inside his mind and just write down what had popped up in his mind. And what a mind it was. Well, I had no recollection of having written that introduction. I have almost no recollection of having written most of the stuff that's in the book. And when I'm compelled to write something, it's just I sit down and it just sort of pours into my head. And I don't know from where. And I'm always... My second favorite writer next to Mark Twain is a fellow named Ben Hecht, who wrote the best book about show business and politics anybody ever wrote. It's called The Child of the Century. It's absolutely brilliant, and people should get it and read it. It's just a wonderful, wonderful book. Anyway, he said that a man's mind is to him what a beautiful woman's body is to her. A beautiful woman looks into the mirror and admires what she sees. But when a man's mind puts something out on paper, that's what he admires. And that's exactly how it is with me, and how it is, I'm sure, with a lot of your listeners who are creative. They somehow don't know where this wellspring comes from. So anyway, and what this little book is, it's sort of chicken soup for the funny bone and the brain. You know, that book, Chicken Soup for the Soul, was turned down by 100 publishers. Can you believe that? And the guy persisted and finally got it published and became a mega millionaire from that. Did a couple of more books, and now he sort of helps young writers try to get their books published. Well, I feel that this is sort of chicken soup for the funny bone and the brain. And Richard Belzer, the actor-comedian, gave us a real nice intro. In the front of the book, he said, "My very witty friend John is sometimes mad as hell, but he's always funny as hell. When you repeat some of this to your friends, they'll wonder how you suddenly became so smart and funny. Enjoy, Richard Belzer," which was really nice of him to do.
And Belzer is another one of these guys who, just from observation, because I've never really spoken to him, I would love to, but the fact is that he's another one of these guys who has that double-edged wit that I was talking about regarding Red Fox and these other guys. He's another one, and he's always been very politically minded, very socially minded, and to me that's a hell of a compliment. I would probably, if that were my book, John, I would be so tickled that Richard did that, because
if anyone wants to get it, Chuck, I guess if they just go to Amazon and they Google or search John Barber's Facebook page, Volume 1, Volume 1, it's only $2.45 on Kindle, and the paperback's $4.95. It's great company. It's an easy read. And literally, honestly, you could open it at any page and find something that'll make you laugh, make you think, or maybe even piss you off. But you'll enjoy it. You'll enjoy it.
It's definitely evocative. All of your Facebook stuff, I'm telling you, over the years, I'm watching this and I'm just like, this guy is just incredible. He's not just, the guy who, and I've said this before, that, and I don't know if I told you this off the air or on the air, but, the thing is that the creative mind that brought me real people when I was a kid, this was something different. This had a different tone to it. It was, it really gave me the idea that media in and of itself could be something other than it was. And this is the thing to this day that I see with you, and that's, why I'm an admirer of the Garrison tapes, why, The Last Investigation, all of this stuff that you do. I mean, I see that, and I understand that, all of us that do something creative. I mean, I always enjoyed writing poetry. I sold some of it. Most of my stuff has been destroyed at this point. There's very little of it in existence.
How do you mean destroyed? How could it be destroyed?
Well, because I had the only copies, outside of a few things that were published, and when I got divorced, the now ex-wife terminated most of my possessions and something or other. So I would say about 20,000 pieces of different written work, and I mean all different types. I mean sonnets. Different structures, various pieces of reverse. I mean, you name it. Stuff that was, lyrical representations of historical events that I had put together. But when I was doing all that, and as I had written, lyrics for songs and things like that over the years, to be honest with you, this stuff would just sort of come to me. I would kind of close my eyes, and most of the time I would put the pen on the paper, and that was the last real conscious action I had ever taken regarding this stuff. Usually just came from somewhere else. And it is amazing. Like, I don't think anybody could have written a better introduction for you than that one page that you just read. That sums up everything perfectly. And it's really remarkable. And Richard is definitely one of those people that I think is a genius and a commentator who has over the years gone through many different incarnations as a commentator regarding historical events, regarding current events, and social trends as they have existed. And really, I find it remarkable that he's on your book there making that statement too, and that's apt, let's just say, for the situation here. And like I said, I've just found most everything that I see you writing and saying in a lot of these cases is just so eloquent and so poignant. I just have I have no words really except to like kind of look at it and I nod my head approvingly at most of what you say.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I guess we probably could not, continue chatting a little bit unless we somehow didn't touch on what was happening in Gaza and what was, you can always tell when things in Gaza are getting worse because in America, hundreds and hundreds of people rush to their Facebook pages and post hundreds and hundreds of pictures of their cats and dogs. So
Yeah.
they do not want to face the reality of it. It's like Shirley Temple during the Depression. Made these wonderful little Shirley Temple shows because people couldn't face looking at the Depression. But there's something that I put up on my Facebook page, which will probably be in volume 2, that I would sort of like to read to you. I can't ad-lib it because it's kind of touchy, and I want to make sure that I don't make any mistakes about it. So if you don't mind, maybe I could read this to you.
No, I have no problem with that, John. My viewpoint on this has been that this has been a long ignored situation, that is the largest open air concentration camp in the world. It is a criminal government that the United States government is supporting, and this has driven me absolutely crazy over the years.
Well, let me tell you something. The horrible thing is that anybody, there's more criticism of Israel in Israel by Jews than there is allowed criticism of Israel in this country.
Mm.
And if you criticize Israel in this country, you're labeled an anti-Semite. Well, that's probably something that would be impossible to label me, because I remember back in 1972, you may remember when the Munich massacre occurred during the Olympics. Those Israeli athletes were murdered. You remember that incident?
Well, I was too young to remember it.
Well,
I've seen the footage of it. I'm
okay,
aware.
well,
Yeah.
10 Israeli athletes were murdered by an outfit called Black Tuesday. And the Olympics went on, unfortunately, after that. And I was working in the newsroom at Metro Media, Channel 11 at the time, and we used to watch the feed from Burbank to New York of the Johnny Carson show. It was fed out live, and then it would be held for viewing later in Los Angeles. So this day that it happened, I was rushed to the screen, and I'm waiting for Johnny Carson to come out and make some kind of comment about this horror that we've witnessed all day long on television news. Bruce McKay, a sportscaster, was the guy who was covering it for ABC, which made him a media star. And what is Johnny Carson?
That was the guy who said they're gone. They're all gone, right?
Yeah, and this Johnny Carson comes out and does a monologue. And then he jokes about Doc Severinsen's plaid jacket, and he jokes about Ed McMahon's drinking. I was so enraged because I knew if Jack Parr had that platform, he'd have spent the whole hour and a half talking about what happened to those athletes, but not Carson, that cowardly pig, that insecure alcoholic pig. Good monologist, but a lousy interview and a horrible human being. But in any event, I was so upset, I decided that I was going to write something. So I wrote something called What It Must Mean to Be a Jew in the World Today. And I did it on the 10 o'clock news. Within 2 days, now it's just a local 10 o'clock newscast on the least watched news in Los Angeles, we had 5,000 requests for copies of what it was that I wrote. I got a call from this fella at Century Sitter. His name was Carter, a huge donor to the state of Israel, who had thousands of the videos made up, then asked me for permission to make it the official fundraising film for the United Jewish Appeal. For 2 years, it raised $40 million for the United Jewish Appeal. And I used to joke about the fact that when I was a struggling comedian, I used to go and work small crowds, do small speeches in front of 150 people for $150. I said, but once I did this, I was invited to speak before 5,000 Jews for nothing, which happened all the time. In any event, that piece, if you go to my website, johnbarbersworld.com, and Google the videos, there's a lot of great stuff there. But you Google Munich, the Munich Massacre, you'll see that piece from 1972. So there's no way that anybody could call me an anti-Semite. But there is a difference between Judaism and Zionism.
Right.
And this is what I wrote and posted recently, and a number of people have spread it around. Is it all right if I read this? It's kind of brief.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Judaism is an ancient religion. Zionism is a political movement created by Theodor Herzl in 1898. What a lot of people are not informed of, but that hundreds of prominent bright Jews are informed of, but can't face, is that during World War II, Zionist Jews facilitated the murder of hundreds of thousands of what they called ordinary poor Jews by the Nazis to create sympathy for the creation of an Israeli state in Palestine. No one wrote or chronicled this better or more loudly than Ben Hecht, a famous columnist, Hollywood's highest paid screenwriter, prominent playwright, and the first propagandist for that cause of an independent Israel long before it was one. And also, he was a Jew. The last chapter of his brilliant autobiography, A Child of the Century, details the early days of this heartbreaking historic story. For asking the Jews who owned the studios to contribute, he was denied employment by bringing attention to the country that indeed Jews did own Hollywood. He only got work from Daryl Zanuck, a Jew, and Spiros Skouras, a Greek, head of Fox, but only if he'd write under a pseudonym. He chose the name Patrick Henry. America's most prominent rabbi, Stephen Wise, and others denounced him. As a result of his efforts, aided by a number of prominent stars, he managed to raise millions of dollars for guns and an army of 1,000 Jewish volunteer freedom fighters to sail to North Africa to fight the British who controlled Palestine. They boarded a ship renamed the Ben Hecht. When it approached the harbor at Tel Aviv full of arms and freedom fighters, Ben-Gurion ordered the ship sunk. And it was. Ben-Gurion, the Zionist, had made a secret deal with England to become Israel's first prime minister. Ben-Gurion placed the guns that sank the ship in a museum and had them blessed. Another story suppressed by Israel and America is a story he tells in a chilling book called Perfidy. I think you can read it online. It's the story of a prominent Zionist named Kastner. Like in the movie Marathon Man, when Nazi Laurence Olivier is spotted on a New York street by a Holocaust survivor, Kastner, in spite of the government's attempts to delay his trial, finally faces a jury. It is revealed by survivors that Kastner, a prominent Zionist Jew in Europe, aided the commandants of death camps by putting together lists of lesser Jews. Thousands upon thousands of those people went to their deaths. So when you think of the gruesome slaughter that is Gaza, perhaps it is not Jews doing the killing. It is Zionists and the 545 cowardly American members of our Congress and Senate who endorse them and, worst of all, supply them. There you go. And something that a lot of people do not know. There are 100 members of the U.S. Senate and 445 members of Congress. Do you know, Chuck, when they take office, they do not, like the President of the United States, swear allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. They do not swear allegiance to support the Bill of Rights. You know what they sign, Chuck?
Tell me.
They sign a pledge to support Israel. Would you believe that? And only a handful of politicians have refused to sign it, and one of them was Cynthia McKinney, the black member of Congress, I think from North Carolina. Mm-hmm. But because AIPAC is so strong, that's the American Israeli Political Action Committee, they have such influence in the media and politics, they slandered Cynthia, they gerrymandered her district, and she's no longer in office. The same happened with Paul Wellstone. Well, John Kennedy recognized AIPAC as a foreign lobby when he took office, and he tried to get them to be registered as a foreign lobby. And they fought him tooth and nail in the courts to avoid it. He was murdered. Lyndon Johnson, afraid of having the same happen, let AIPAC be. They have never registered as a foreign lobby. And another thing that people do not know about Israel, it's the only country in the world without defined borders. It is the only country in the world that has refused to sign the Non-Proliferation Pact, and 20 years ago they put into prison, into solitary confinement, one of their most revered scientists who told the world, we have 300 nuclear weapons. And he was only recently just released. Right. AIPAC. And here's something that just enrages me, that so many dual citizens are allowed to hold high public office in the United States, this dwindling democracy. Dual citizens who owe their allegiance not to America, but to another country. This dwindling democracy is affected by the policies, domestic and foreign, that they demand. Right now, there are probably 30 prominent American Israelis holding very high office in this government. Well, way out of proportion to their population. How many American Russians are there? American Iranian, American Scotch, American Canadian, American Spanish, American Icelandic, American Mexican? There are none. You should only be allowed to hold high office if you're only an American citizen.
Well, precisely. I mean, we're in a representative republic is what it is. I mean,
we are not. We are now in an oligarchy.
Well, okay. You know what? You're correct. But what I'm saying is it's supposed to be a representative republic, and how is it that our representatives can hold dual loyalties like this? This has been one of my questions for a long time. And it's one of those things that does come up a lot, and you can't get an answer on it, though, can you?
Well, they're afraid to answer it. Nobody wants to answer it, for crying out loud. They're terrified. But next week, hopefully by Wednesday, I'm going to have something up on YouTube, which is an open letter to a prominent member of our government, supported by facts and visuals. If it does not go viral and create a firestorm, I will be very, very, very surprised. It says, and shows everything, and it does it in less than 10 minutes. It's all anyone ever need to know about what's going on in Gaza. So that's all I can tell you about that. We're now in the process of editing it, and hopefully it'll be up in the middle of next week.
Well, look, please make sure to point that link to me, because I will do everything I can to put it around. I know where it's going, and I know what needs to be done with it. So please do me a favor and make sure that I have it, because I'm one of these people who misses a lot of this viral stuff unless it's handed to me directly by somebody. But I'll do everything I can to put it in as many hands as I can.
Oh, so, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I appreciate it a whole bunch. So anyway, I do hope some folks call in who want to chat to us, because it'd be nice to talk to somebody. I'm tired of listening to myself.
Well, I'm sorry to say, John, I could listen to you, for hours. It's just the interesting, history that you have, the absolutely steel trap wit that you have is just such a rarity. Most people can't even, tell a story like you do. And like I said, I'm not sure if it's the richness of the details based on, the adventurous sort of life you've had. We've covered before on my show about you getting snagged by immigration, and your would-be escape, and going out into the laundry chute. And I'll tell you, I was
remember that.
Oh, absolutely, and I was enthralled by it. It was one of the best stories I've ever had on this show, and believe me, I've had some interesting people. I mean, Joan Mellon's been on here. She's a great speaker.
I love her.
Terry Joyce is a comedian who tells an interesting story about getting caught up in a bust at a medical marijuana dispensary. And
oh God, that's
believe me, I've gotten and the thing was, she wasn't actually at the dispensary. She was at a doctor in the same building and got taken down. It was pretty funny, and a lot of the really fascinating. I mean, and I've had Scott Enyard on, who was a witness to the RFK assassination. His story was something. You're familiar with Scott Enyard's story, right?
Oh yes. I am very, very familiar with that. Anyway, I was just looking at something here, because I got to follow the instructions of David, who designed my website. And the note that I put up today on my Facebook page was U.S. foreign policy position since Bush's illegal invasion of Iraq, described in 6 words. Quote, caught between Iraq and a hard place.
See?
Anyway, okay, here is today's sermon. I mean, I sit around sometimes. I can't. The only television I watch is C-SPAN, because I watch book notes and find some really wonderful people on book notes, and I watch golf because I love golf, and I watch hockey because I'm a hockey junkie. That's it. I don't watch, and then I watch CSI because my son's involved with that show. But that's all the television I watch. So I sit around and I doodle. Some people, like you, musically might doodle with a guitar or piano with your voice, or you might doodle with a pencil and draw stuff. When I doodle with the typewriter. And this was what I doodled here. So I can't remember having written it, so I'm gonna read it to you if you don't mind.
Of course, go right ahead.
Okay. Over 2,000 years ago, Moses presented the 10 Commandments to the Jews. They would have asked for more, as Jackie Mason said, but they didn't know they were free. Okay. Since then, they've been the foundation, the growing, leaky foundation on which Christianity built its religion, Vatican, and myriad glass cathedrals. And judging by the actions more so today of these Christians, they have somehow augmented or ignored God's commandments as they do the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, or any laws that make sense. So this is how their new 10 Commandments must read. 1. Thou shalt have no gods before me. And to make sure you see my name every day, be sure to put it on your money. 2. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. Pornography is not graven. 3. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, but never forget to tell the mighty and small alike to go fuck themselves. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, and if you have a business, open at 10 and close at 6. Honor thy mother and father. If you know who your father is, still get a DNA test.
Nice.
Thou shalt not kill, unless in any kind of uniform, taking any kind of orders.
Wow.
Thou shalt not commit adultery, unless your wife has another one of those headaches.
Wow.
Thou shalt not steal, unless you have an offshore or Swiss account. Number 9.
Gotta hide it somewhere.
Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, unless Homeland Security makes it worth your while. Finally, 10. Thou shalt not covet anything, especially the truth, because if you covet the truth, it means you might have to do something about it. Amen.
Wow. John, what? Can I ask you something? How long ago did you post that?
About 3 weeks ago, I guess.
Oh, what? You know, I'm curious. What type of reactions did you get to that one?
People loved it. I mean, even people who are religious love it. I mean, they face the truth of what is going on. You know, so I think only once did I ever get something that was really, really negative. I almost never get anything negative, but I got it in a negative, but I didn't get it in a hostile way. You know?
Okay.
And I still maintained a correspondence with that person. That person hasn't defriended me yet. As a matter of fact, only one person I've ever run across has ever defriended me, and that's because I declined to go meet him somewhere for lunch. I mean, I don't go to meet strangers. I only have a couple of real personal friends. So anyway, I don't do that. So that was the only person that ever sort of defriended me. And you know, I got friend requests from really, really interesting people. The one guy that keeps turning down, I've only sent out one friend request, but he ignored it, and that was Oliver Stone. And you think that Oliver would be really interested in helping us spread the word about Jim Garrison, but he's only interested in spreading word about his film, and not Kevin Costner, and not about the real Jim Garrison. An interesting thing about Amazon. Amazon, you know, I've had the DVD for the Last Word in the Assassination has been up since March. I've only done your show. I've done Leno Stanik's show, Brent Hollett, George Knapp, and Jeff Rentz. I've only done a few shows. No real major publicity or anything. And do you know that every single day, 3 or 4 copies of that DVD are bought just on word of mouth?
Well, I mention it all the time. You know, not just on
thank you. And then
the
amazing thing about Amazon, since I'm on it, I guess, is about once every 3 or 4 weeks, they send a list of things that you should buy or you should be an interest in. And of course, they know I'm interested in the assassination because of all the research. So they sent me a list of 10 films that I should consider looking at for purchase. The very top of the list was The Last Word in the Assassination. The very bottom of the list was Oliver Stone.
Well, and Oliver Stone, despite the fact that I had actually been in actual regular snail mail kind of correspondence with him at one point, he turns away my requests for contact on the internet. Also, I sent him material. When he was going to come out with the anniversary edition of the movie and all that. And he's worked with some people, and it definitely helped as far as getting out the word, let's just say, regarding Jim Garrison, and the JFK movie did a lot in that way. But it is kind of a bad representation of Garrison personally, and although it did, and you got to give credit where credit's due, John. I mean, it did help to create the Assassination Records Review Board.
There's no question about that. I mean, there's absolutely no question about that. So everybody should thank him for that. But one of the things that has appalled me, and then I have something else I want to read to you that grew out of my experiences as a film critic, which led me to make a recent observation that I find a little bit depressing. But the thing that amazes me about a lot of the really, really bright people involved in researching the assassination, and there are dozens and dozens of them. Some of them hold high positions as professors and scholars and teachers. Others are just students or just aficionados or interested in the case. But the thing that bothers me is that so many of the leading ones are so envious of their counterparts. They're always belittling them. They're always interfering with them. They're always not assisting them. I mean, the word is to get the truth out. The word is not to get your truth out. The word is to get the whole truth out. And it's heartbreaking to me to see the numbers of people who do that. Now, I know that Oliver Stone, and I don't want to, well, I will mention the guy's name. The guy's name is Harold Weisberg. Harold Weisberg wrote some of the great books about the assassination, self-published. They're called the whitewash books.
Well, right, he did whitewash. He also did, he did a few different things, actually.
Wonderful stuff.
Case Open was another one in response to Gerald Posner's book.
Yes.
Weisberg is legendary in the assassination community.
Yes, brilliant. And he's a former intelligence officer with the military, so he knows what he's talking about. He's interviewed in The Last Word on the assassination. Anyway, he was one of the advisors to Oliver Stone in the making of the movie.
Right.
Well, you may remember that before they even cranked a camera for that movie, the Washington Post, and I think this guy's name was Lardner, but I can't remember, came out with a savage attack of Oliver Stone, making the movie about the murder of John Kennedy being a conspiracy. Now, this was months before Oliver was going to make it. I think Harold got pissed off at Oliver because Oliver was consulting more, probably with Jim Mars and somebody else, than he was with him. So Harold took the script and sent it to this CIA asset at the Washington Post.
Yeah, and sadly, it was a first draft of the script. It actually
That's right,
wasn't.
and I am convinced, even though I've never heard Oliver talk about it, but I would ask him, I'm convinced that Oliver watered down his film because Warner Brothers and everybody was after him, and he watered down the film. Now, the film is still an interesting film, the most important thing about it being that it was a film, and it did create a furor, and it got the things done that it got done. But, so I was disappointed in Harold, and I was sure it was Harold who did that. But I love Harold's work other than that. But there's so many people like that in this business. Do you know there's an outfit called JFK Lancer?
Right.
Run by a lady named Deborah Conway.
Yes,
5 years ago, I asked her through an email if she would put up a link of the Garrison tapes. The only person who would do anything about it was George Knapp, the Sunday host of Coast to Coast. And he had a link on his site. Now, George literally saved the documentary, raved about it, and I sent this note to Deborah Conway. She totally ignored me. Totally ignored me. I sent a second request. She totally ignored me. When we did The Last Word on the Assassination, which is really the very best documentary and panel about the assassination, regardless of any book. It is the best. She won't even post that, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I mean, we could put you and the film aside, okay, just for a second. Yeah. Joan Mellon has done an incredible amount of work, not just on Jim Garrison, but on all sorts of aspects here. We're talking about George de Mohrenschildt, his time.
The CIA.
CIA. I mean, there is so many aspects to Joan Mellon's work. I mean, there's at least 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 6 of her books I can think of that I've read that have to do with the assassination. Dick Russell, who was also part of it, wrote The Man Who Knew Too Much.
Great book.
Okay, which is an absolutely astonishing book, a subject that nobody else wanted to touch, dealing with Oswald and the possibilities of the intrigues between the intelligence agencies and all these things that nobody, and I do mean nobody, was touching back then when he first put that book out. It's since been updated. It's even better, okay? And you can look to see even... oh, man, you know, the guy's name... Oh, James Douglas, who wrote JFK and the Unspeakable, which to me is one of the best standalone books that has been written on the assassination in at least 2 decades, okay? If you take his book and you take a look at who he references in those books and where he's getting some of his information, it came from these people, okay? And again, that's not taking anything away from Douglas or his original research, but believe me, when he tipped his hat to people that had written about the assassination in the past, this is who he referred to. That's just 2 members of the panel that we're talking about here, that were at this Las Vegas, this, which first of all was scheduled for a different time, and there was a whole thing about that. But I mean, and then you add in, you know, what I've always referred to as the Garrison tapes, because that's the way I first discovered it. It's absolutely one of the essential documentaries if you're going to collect documentaries on the assassination in general, and if you're going to collect anything on Jim Garrison, if you're going to take a look at any expose, just short of maybe his own books, okay, on the Trail of the Assassins and Heritage of Stone. And
Chuck, the thing that pleased me the most, in order to do this, I was forced to spend almost my last $20,000. And people involved in doing this kind of stuff never spend their own money. But it was the only way I could get it done. But the thing that pleased me the most was, first of all, being able to pay somebody like Jim Mars or Dick Russell or Joan Mellon to come out here and do that. What really pleased me is I did not think there was any way possible that anybody in front of an audience could follow the documentary, The Garrison Tapes. Now, even though I did it myself, I look at it every time as a stranger, and it gets more compelling every time I see it, and it's told so well, personally and professionally, about him and about his personal life and about his pursuit of the case. But Dick and Joan and Jim Mars absolutely improve upon the documentary and expand on the information and knowledge that they impart, and it's thrilling. And there are a couple of great questions that come from the audience that they answer that even improve upon it more. So it is, you know, I am really humbled by the fact I never hear about it, but every day 3 or 4 people in anonymity show up on Amazon and spend $15 to buy that piece of history. And I'm astonished. And you want to know something? If it gets any kind of real publicity or come this November, it could sell hundreds of thousands. And if it did, I would get around to doing part 2 about the Garrison tapes because he gave me so much material. Anyway, this is the final thing that I want to read to you, and then I want you to chat with me about whatever you want to chat about. And this is an outgrowth of something that occurred to me. I answered this question when I was a film critic, and it led to me to make an observation about what's going on in the world now. So if we've got a couple of minutes, this is a minute. Do you mind?
No, go right ahead, of course.
Okay, Chuck. When I was a film critic for Los Angeles Magazine and KNBC, I once said American movies are like people. only 1 in 100 is worthwhile, and that one makes up for the 99 who are, in three little words, words, not worth it. However, in society today, it's harder and harder to find the 1 in 100 people who are worthwhile. They've either been shot or discredited or marginalized, which leads me to conclude that we will not see, as many progressives and conservatives alike hope for, a people's revolution like the one that built our country, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, all ignited by a spark to improve the system and the society that could be built to better and more equitably serve its citizens. I've been sadly led to this conclusion by Fukushima, by what happened and what didn't happen. If ever a nation of ordinary people had the spark to storm and overthrow their government, the plant owners, and the media, all of which misled and misinformed them, telling them they'd be safe soon, as would the creatures in the sea which they eat, this was it. In a few years, hundreds of thousands will die, giving birth to deformities. Their leaders not only committed crimes against the people, but against nature. Ecuador is the only country in the world which in their constitution calls this a crime. And did the people who once committed hara-kiri for their emperor take to the streets or storm the buildings of the perpetrators? No. What did they do? They bought cotton masks because their government told them to. Even the 1% that own this country know how corrupt and inhumane it has become, a builder of things to buy and not builders of people who can think. They know it's corrupt because that's how a lot of them got into the 1% club. And we all know it. But only a handful speak up or are given a platform on which to speak. The rest of our people just put invisible masks over their mouths. The government didn't warn them about the consequences of speaking up. They did it on their own. That's it.
Again, profound and just right on. There's yet again, people voluntarily place these invisible masks over their mouths so that they could be stifled, so they could muffle the true sounds that should be coming from them about this. And I believe that the true toll of that is still as yet unseen, as yet unknown. I think that we're going to be dealing with this for many, many generations to come because, the damage is still occurring. It's still blowing up as we speak, over 3 years ago. And where is the outcry? Where is the outrage? It's not, it's just silence at this point.
Well, of course, I've mentioned this before, my favorite American writer was Mark Twain. And Mark Twain said 100 years ago, he said if voting made a difference, they wouldn't let us do it. Well, it was true then, and it's truer now. He also said, if you read he said, if you don't read the papers, you're uninformed. But if you do read the papers, you're misinformed.
Yeah.
so that's what America has come to. But America was always that way. It's just now that we're seeing it. I mean, there was a time when there was hope. I mean, FDR during the Depression saved capitalism by instituting the Glass-Steagall Act, which prevented banks from doing what the banks did in 2008, which financially destroyed this country, and in 1929 led to the Great Depression. But what he did to save capitalism, he instituted Social Security, he instituted the Works program to give people, and look at the great highway systems and dam systems we had in this country for years and years because of what FDR did. But Clinton got rid of Glass-Steagall, and Ronald Reagan got rid of regulations. So at one time when there were 5,000 different individuals who owned all our newspapers and radio stations and newspapers in the country, it's now down to 6 corporations. Ronald Reagan did that. Ronald Reagan dissents with the Fairness Doctrine. When I had Ronald Reagan on my television show in 1970, I had to then put on a Democrat, I had to put on a socialist, I had to put on a Nazi. Anybody who could prove they could get 5% of the vote could get equal time. But after Jim Garrison went on NBC as a result of a lawsuit against NBC, which it should have lost its license for trying to disrupt his trial of the Clay Shaw trial in New Orleans, that NBC was ordered to give, by the FCC, equal time to Garrison for a white paper they did sabotaging him. Mm-hmm. Anyway, as a result of that, the establishment said, we can't have people like Garrison on television, even at midnight, telling the country the truth. Get rid of the Fairness Doctrine. And Reagan did that. So I must tell you, there is no hope for America. The reason there is no hope for America because the hitmen for the 1%, the Central Intelligence Agency, the intelligence apparatus, the FBI, have made it a point to single out the system changers like Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, Malcolm X, and John Kennedy, and they get rid of them. You will never find anybody now who can surface publicly to gather the crowds that a Jimmy Hoffa or a Malcolm X or a Cesar Chavez or a Ralph Nader could muster up 10, 15, 20 years ago. They'll kill them, and they do kill them.
Absolutely true, John. You know, I want everybody who's listening to us to go to johnbarbersworld.com. Check out all the wonderful stuff that he has up there. Definitely John Barber's Facebook page, that book, which is on Amazon. You said it's available on Kindle for $2.45, so it's not real expensive. And even the paperback version is $4.95 or something like that, John?
$4.95.
So check that out on Amazon. Definitely, of course, the last investigation of the assassination, which is the Garrison tapes plus the presentations of Jim Mars, Joan Mellon, Dick Russell, and of course John is there too. And I want to thank you again, John, for being on with me tonight. It is really a pleasure and a privilege to discuss all of these things with you. You have an incredible talent for making these 2 hours just absolutely fly by. And it's really great. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to kind of throw in here real quick toward the end. I know we've only got a little bit of time left, so, anything.
I'm delighted to be here. I'm lucky. It'd be great if everybody occasionally had a couple of hours in which to express themselves and which to rant, so I really appreciate my time here. And again, I see that lovely picture of your baby there looking exactly like my son. And, where there's birth, there's hope, And there is no birth without pain. Giving birth is not a joyful occasion. It's an often painful occasion. And America is going to have some kind of rebirth. And that rebirth is going to be very, very painful. Anyway, I want to thank you again, Chuck, very, very much. And we'll do this again soon.
Well, I hope so, John. Anytime, I'll tell you, because it is just absolutely riveting for me and just so enjoyable. I mean, any of the subjects that we cover have, I sit back a lot and I don't say much when I have you on because you just fill the time so well. And I'm telling you, it's like I'm listening to an audiobook. I don't even have much to say. And you do this stuff just, off the top of your head. I know you read a few things tonight, but generally speaking, it's just...
Webcam microphone up close.
Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was
but I have the files.
I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things.
I said to
all
myself,
these books,
that guy,
how can
reminds
that
me
be
of
possible?
the brain.
Pistols and fondle slab of choice, I don't know when that was, internet, professional wrestlers, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the cartoon comes from as long as it's real. It's hard to get real information, because seriously,
you don't want you to have
just read two sources.